Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for our virtual session on exploring carbon markets in Kenya. It's wonderful to see you all join, and thank you for making time on this cold Nairobi morning. A huge thank you to our partners who are also our speakers today from Burn Manufacturing, Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, VCMI, and USAID. Thank you very much for coming on board to share your insights and experience. Members, in recent times, we have seen a growth in awareness on the need and urgency to combat climate change by reducing carbon footprint and mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon markets definitely offer a dynamic and innovative solution that can accelerate progress towards a low carbon economy. By putting a price on carbon emissions, they incentivize emission reduction, foster the adoption of clean technologies, and support the development of renewable energies and projects. This is some of the activities we've been seeing happening here in Kenya, and we're delighted to have the panel of experts with us today to shed light on the policy approach, best practice, successful case studies, and strategies and opportunities that can be implemented as mechanisms within our unique Kenyan context. Our experts today, who will introduce themselves more thoroughly shortly, we have Beatrice Wamalwa, Acting Environment Office Director at USAID, Bianca Gishangi, Office of the Special Climate Envoy for Kenya, Executive Office to the President. She's the regional lead for VCMI. And of course, we have Chris McKinney, the CEO of Burn Manufacturing. We welcome you all today for this session. Please keep your questions and comments coming in the chat. We want this session to be as interactive as possible. We've allocated some time at the end of the panel discussion to address your questions, both live in the session as well as through chat responses. And if there are any questions we don't get to, we will give written responses after the session. I would like to invite our moderator, Evelyn Korpar. She is the head of communications at Burn Manufacturing, and she'll be able to kick us off with the session. Over to you, Evelyn.
Thank you, Eva. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today as we embark on this journey into the world of carbon markets. We will explore why companies should wholeheartedly embrace this transformatory approach and delve into the broader benefits that carbon finance bestows upon communities, guided by the latest data and policy discussions. The reports keep coming. Global carbon dioxide emissions have reached unprecedented levels, underlining the urgency of climate action. It's evident that traditional approaches to mitigating climate change alone may fall short of meeting the ambitious global targets. This is where carbon markets emerge as a transformative solution, empowering companies to proactively contribute to climate goals. From a business perspective, there are quite a number of studies that show that corporates adopting low carbon practices outperform their peers in terms of resilience, innovation, and long-term profitability. Embracing carbon markets fosters a culture of sustainability, propelling companies to navigate the complex challenges of a rapidly evolving economy. Moreover, policymakers and industry leaders are increasingly engaged in conversations to strengthen the role of carbon markets. These high-level dialogues highlight the need for robust, transparent, and inclusive carbon pricing mechanisms that incentivize emission reductions while ensuring social equity. These policy discussions revolve around creating market signals that attract private investments into clean technologies, thus accelerating the transition to a low carbon future. Turning our attention to the broader benefits that carbon markets bestow upon countries, we find that these innovative market-based mechanisms amplify national efforts in tackling climate change. As we gather here today, let's recognize that carbon markets represent a strategic convergence of policy, science, and business innovation. And embracing these transformative mechanisms is a pathway towards securing a thriving, sustainable future for generations to come. It is a collaborative journey where companies and governments unite under visionary policy frameworks, leveraging the power of carbon finance to create positive change. As mentioned by Eva, my name is Evelyn Kopar. I am the head of communications at BAN and the moderator for this exciting conversation this morning. And as we proceed to the panel session, and as mentioned, we have thoughtfully allocated sufficient time for engaging discussions and an interactive question and answer session for everyone. So therefore, I encourage everyone to prepare questions and actively engage throughout the session. And we will be responding both in chat and through the panelists to all the questions that will be tabled. So allow me to move to our panel session. And before we delve into discussing the themes, I'd like to invite each panelist to briefly introduce themselves and share their perspectives on the significance of carbon markets in addressing climate change. Let's begin with Bianca.
Good morning. Thank you, Evelyn, and thank you, Eva, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you once again. So as the introduction mentioned, I am currently on secondment to the Climate Envoy's office at the Executive Office of the President, and I also work as the regional lead for VCMI here in Africa. And we see that carbon markets, just as the introduction has said, is an area that is growing. And we can see that it definitely is a financial instrument that can catalyze climate action, across different countries. So whether it's developed or developing, we're taking advantage of these mechanisms. And like you've said, they're being used to meet host country national targets, our NDCs, and net zero. There's flow of technology, and there's a very real focus on community benefits and sustainable development, which I know in the past has received criticism, but now is really taking a center role in how we are participating in carbon market activities, ensuring that what we are doing is also high quality and high integrity on the supply side here in Kenya, because our president has said that he wants carbon credits to be the next big export. So it is a priority for us to take advantage of this, because we're in a situation where we're looking at Kenya and its resources, and it's about the opportunities and the investments of how Kenya can contribute to the global problem on climate change. So really, it's a priority for us to take advantage of this. We have been taking part in the past, but we really need to do that at the moment. And there's definitely a lot of room for growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca. I'll then move to Beatrice.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Beatrice Wamalwa. I'm the Acting Director of the Environment Office at USAID Kenya and East Africa. For the last 20 years, I've had the opportunity to work with communities that are most affected by the climate crisis in the arid areas of Kenya. I've also had the rare opportunity to be part of the team that designed and rolled out the world's largest grasslands carbon project right here in northern Kenya. With just the first carbon sales from this project, I have seen health facilities and schools built in places they never existed. 4,000 students from pastoralist families are in school, and I've seen facilities and business investments by community members. Let's face it, our world is facing an unprecedented climate crisis. We need every tool in the toolbox, and carbon finance is one of those tools that can provide much needed finance for the and to mitigate the crisis. I'm also cognizant that carbon markets are not a silver bullet. This tool can only work if the world commits to high integrity, transparency, fair benefits, and a bold commitment to decarbonization. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you, Beatrice. And you've said something very important, that we need many tools in the toolbox, and carbon finance is just one of the many tools that we can leverage. And someone who will speak a little bit more on carbon finance and how it's helping to unlock opportunities for communities is Chris McKinney. Chris?
Hey, thanks, Evelyn, and good morning, everybody. My name is Chris. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Byrne Manufacturing. Eva actually gave me a promotion in her introduction to the CEO, so I'll have to let my boss know. But at the moment, I'm the Chief Commercial Officer. I've been with Byrne here in Kenya for 10 years. For those of you who don't know Byrne, We're the largest modern clean cooking company in the world as of today, and we were founded on a mission of saving lives in forests by tackling the cooking crisis, which is essentially the problem of people cooking on open fires across the world, which is a major health issue, a major economic issue, but more importantly, for the panel that we're on today, it's a major climate issue as well. So cooking alone accounts for about 3% of global CO2 emissions. And that's about the same as the entire aviation industry. So it's often like an overlooked climate issue, but a major one that we deal with here in Kenya and across Africa. So Burn was founded to tackle this problem. And today we have a whole value chain of operations from R&D to manufacturing to cook stove distribution, and then on to carbon credit generation and sales as well, all centered here in Kenya. And we've grown to a pretty large scale. We're now distributing stoves across 10 countries in Africa, and we've distributed nearly 4 million clean cook stoves to date. So these are, for those who aren't familiar, our stoves are basically super efficient, super usable stoves that are designed to replace traditional Jikos or traditional open fires, 3-stone fires, and allow people to burn as little fuel as possible, or ideally no wood fuel, in it as cleanly as possible, and basically address the health and climate issues that come from current cooking practices. So thanks, good to be with you today.
Thanks, everyone. So our first round of questions will cover an overview of Kenya's approach to carbon markets. And I'll start with Bianca. Looking at the work you're doing as sitting in the office of the Special Climate Envoy for Kenya, could you provide us an overview of Kenya's approach to carbon markets, looking at insights into the Climate Amendment Bill, which has been a huge conversation for the better part of this year, and its potential impact on the country's carbon market ecosystem?
Thank you for that. So Kenya has been participating in carbon markets for quite a while, I'd say over the past 2 decades, but what we're seeing is a lot of changes in how these mechanisms are working globally. We used to take part in the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, and have been in the voluntary carbon market space for quite a long time. But we are now in the Paris Agreement, and we're moving into a situation where we have a voluntary carbon market that's growing, but we also have Article 6 of the Paris Agreement that we as Kenya have said that we want to utilize. So for us, we definitely have to have a framework that encompasses all kinds of carbon markets activities and is leaving room for growth with the VCM, which is currently at $2 million. And we know that this can definitely be scaled up and we can tap into it. So in order to do this, in order for us to realize all these benefits that we're talking about, we have to have in place strong institutional and legal frameworks that can actually be the foundation for bringing in the private sector investment that we need in the country. And what we've done in Kenya with that is we have the Climate Change Act, which we would like to amend to incorporate carbon markets so that then you can have regulations that are coming from a mother law, because you can't regulate what is not already in a mother law. So that is what brings us to this process of the amendment bill, where it was drafted by the line ministry that's leading on this, which is Environment. And it was put out for public stakeholder consultation, receiving comments from all kinds of different stakeholders to shape this. And then having it redrafted by the Attorney General's office, submitted to the cabinet, and having a cabinet memo to be approved, after which it can now be tabled to Parliament, where it goes through the legislative process of the different readings. But of course, the parliamentary committee will also have a stakeholder consultation stage to enable further comments and changes to make it as robust as possible. So it's a very, it's quite a process, but that's how policy is done. But the good thing with our country is that we're very keen on having every person's perspective being taken into consideration, and therefore everyone is encouraged to contribute when they can. And what this framework is going to do is really going to provide clarity for investors outside. It's going to give a positive signal that we are ready for the investments to come into this from the private sector, but also it takes into consideration the interests of the people and the community to make sure that we do make sure that the finance is channeled to where it is needed the most. So I would say that without this framework, it becomes very difficult to provide clarity and guidance. So it's definitely a huge step for countries to put in place very robust legal frameworks that can now support this trading for years to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Bianca. And you've mentioned something very critical in terms of providing clarity, giving a positive signal for investments, and putting the interests of people and communities at the center of everything that is happening. And I'd like to now invite Chris, as the commercial officer at BAN, to talk about what BAN does in the role you play in the clean cooking sector, and how does this approach to carbon markets align with Kenya's efforts in combating climate change, particularly in light of the conversation that Bianca has talked about in terms of the Climate Change Amendment Bill.
Right. Well, as Bianca was mentioning, Kenya is in the process of creating the policy and regulation to kind of govern how carbon markets work here. And we're fortunate, I think, to be based in Kenya, who's now one of the leaders in Africa on this front. It's really critical for those of us who operate in the carbon markets to have kind of regulatory clarity on how our projects can operate and how the investments can work. And we do also see that Kenya is trying to give that positive signal that, okay, private industry can come in and play in this space and can help contribute to Kenya's overall development goals and climate goals. So how does Burn operate in this space specifically? We've been in the clean cooking business for a long time, but now with carbon markets, we can really use carbon to dramatically accelerate adoption of clean cooking technologies and to make sure that they're reaching the people who really need them the most. The truth is that for most of our kind of products, we believe that people really deserve the very best cooking technologies. So for their context, so that means the stoves need to be as efficient as they possibly can be, as usable as they possibly can be, as durable as they can be. But this also comes at a cost. And what carbon allows us to do essentially is to dramatically subsidize that cost of adoption to the end users of the stoves, which can act as a massive accelerant on ensuring adoption. So we see that today we're having adoption across rural Kenya that we would not have had without carbon markets. And I think this really gets to the spirit of what Kenya is looking for, the Kenyan government is looking for carbon markets to do as well. As Bianca was mentioning, ideally, carbon is structured in a way where that finance is flowing to the people who need it the most. And we're able to do that very directly and immediately on day one, essentially when people are adopting a stove, through a very large subsidy on the price of that stove that's funded by carbon. But in addition to that, carbon markets can really act as they have ancillary benefits well beyond this kind of initial adoption. So for instance, for our stoves in Kenya, there was a study that was published just last year, a randomized control trial done in Kibera, where half of the homes received a Jiko Koa, which is our flagship charcoal stove, and half did not. And what they found from this study is not only are people cutting their charcoal consumption nearly in half, which comes with massive emissions reductions and health benefits and economic benefits, but they also found that when you added all these benefits up, plus the benefits to society, plus the environmental benefits, a single stove that is delivered to a home in Kenya produces over $1,000 US in benefit to the country and the community and the home who received the stove over its lifetime. So carbon is enabling essentially having this snowball effect where we can, if we can distribute 10 times more stoves with carbon than we could do without that, then each of those stoves is producing $1,000 of value, ancillary value over the course of its lifetime in the country. It's having this kind of massive snowball effect that can create really large economic and development benefits for Kenya that wouldn't exist without carbon.
Thanks, Chris. And talking about development benefits and looking at how finance can flow to those who need it the most, Beatrice, and with your role as the acting executive director at USAID in Kenya, could you share about how USAID is supporting carbon markets in Kenya, and how do these efforts synergize with Kenya's climate goals?
Thank you, Eva. Our climate change strategy at USAID is to work with partner governments and local actors to set the global trajectory in achieving our vision of a resilient, prosperous, and equitable world with net zero greenhouse gas emissions. The African Carbon Markets Initiative was launched, as you all know, at COP27 and is a collaborative effort supported by multiple donors. USAID's Chief Climate Officer, Gillian Caldwell, is part of the steering committee driving this effort. The initiative aims to dramatically expand Africa's participation in voluntary carbon markets and support the continent into the shift to Article 6. With this vision, USAID funded a program to support the government of Kenya in defining its path to making Kenya the leading investment destination for carbon markets in Africa. The overarching aim of this program is to support the country monetizing the 20 to 25 metric tons of CO2 credit opportunity, which could potentially mobilize up to $500 million in revenue per annum by enabling a high quality, high integrity market and mobilizing significant private investments. Through this work, as Bianca has mentioned, USAID supported the government in defining core elements for regulation around the type of market to pursue, monitoring and registration, reporting and implementation for benefit sharing, the approach for jurisdictional credits and legacy projects, and a view on fiscal policies to incentivize the market. In addition to all of these, the work resulted in defining the implementation roadmap for the country to operate a well-regulated carbon market. And Bianca talked quite a lot about this. Lessons learned from this work will greatly enhance carbon market activation efforts across the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think you've actually started setting context of why this is important, especially for countries in terms of unlocking the investment opportunity, because from what we see, the big question is, it looks like this big amorphous thing, but now being able to break it down into, this is where the opportunity, how to monetize, and how policy and development partners are helping us to unlock. And then with an example of BAN of how they've been able to unlock, I'd like to move into another bit where you could delve a little bit more in what you've talked about in terms of supporting Kenya and the country. And Beatrice, if you could speak up a little bit more on what USAID has been able to do in terms of, or give specific examples of initiatives that have positively impacted the carbon market. If you have examples, even in the clean cooking sector or broadly across from a climate change perspective and a carbon perspective, it will help bring this idea home.
Thank you so much, Eva. So the work undertaken with the government of Kenya has resulted in defining the true potential of tech-based carbon project development in the country. But it has also helped identify key hurdles that will need to be addressed to realize the full potential. These include identifying methodologies that are relevant to the country and the current challenges that the clean cooking industry faces in implementation, monitoring, verification, and connection to the broad ecosystem. The broad ecosystem activation element of the program helped in identifying the larger market that could be addressed by developers in the country and defined what this market is looking for. Through ACME, project developers in this space will have access to advanced purchase commitments for their carbon credits, provided they meet the high integrity and high quality markers that are the foundation for the ecosystem connectivity. In addition, we were also able to help the ministry understand the challenges that project developers in the clean cooking space face, and what support will be required from legislation and fiscal policies to ensure development continues to thrive. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you. And therefore we move back to Bianca in terms of, with that in mind and the perspective of what US is doing, what, from your perspective within the Office of the Special Climate Envoy, How has USAID support for carbon markets influenced the policies that you're currently putting in place? And even the initiatives you're starting to look at from a government perspective, looking at the benefits not only for communities, but also looking at potential investors coming into the market.
Yes, well, I think Beatrice has gone really into it and explained it quite well. The government is definitely appreciative of the support that we have received from USAID with the CMAPs, the carbon market activation plans that were mentioned, which of course are giving support and guidance into this framework of how we establish our carbon markets in Kenya, incorporating everything that's required and giving insight and guidance during this regulatory process as well. So we definitely have seen the benefits of that. Our efforts will definitely fit into this framework that can be replicated in other African countries. We will be the pioneer. And with this, you're definitely seeing it's having an effect bigger than Kenya. So it's contributing to Africa as a whole, also in terms of making sure that we're all taking part and not getting left behind. So it's very integral to have this common framework, even though countries have different legislative processes. Kenya can understand theirs and share their experience, and then other countries can also learn, and there's a lot of peer-to-peer exchange. So definitely the CMAPs have been quite instrumental. We've seen that they've supported projects across different sectors. So some to do with the rangelands in northern Kenya, and then of course, the clean cooking. So across these different aspects, the benefits are immense, just beyond the mitigation outcome. As Chris has mentioned before, you're seeing gender empowerment, you're seeing health benefits, you're seeing protection of the ecosystem. So support across these different sectors from the projects that they are supporting has been really instrumental, work with the conservancies as well. So we definitely appreciate the support. There's still a lot to be done, especially when it comes to protecting our wildlife and ecosystems. We definitely need to do a lot more work there, and carbon markets is really a way to get concrete financing that can help us reduce our debt that we're using to manage some of these places. So it's going to bring in real investment, and definitely having the foundation, the frameworks in place is so instrumental, and we are quite appreciative of it.
Thank you. Chris, with 10 years in the market, witnessing the growth of BAN over the last 10 years, you've witnessed the growth of carbon finance in the clean cooking sector. Can you share some examples of how carbon finance has unlocked scale for this particular sector and contributed to achieving both environmental and social impact goals?
Sure. So, well, yeah, to get specific about how carbon finance can work, like even in our backyard here in Kenya, we have one project running today distributing our wood stoves. Our wood stove is called the Kuniokoa. So it's the most efficient natural draft household wood stove in the world. And it's, it reduces use of wood by about 70% and emissions by about the same. So this is a really great solution for rural Kenya, where people are otherwise stuck using only 3-stone fires. We've had this stove on the market for about 6 or 7 years now. Without carbon finance, though, by the time it reaches the last mile in rural Kenya, it's going to cost a home about $50 or around 6,000 shillings, 5,000 to 6,000 shillings to adopt one of these stoves, and that's out of reach for the vast majority of homes who are using a 3-stone fire today. We have a project running now where we've had an investor come in and pre-finance the generation of carbon credits that will come from the Kuniokoa stove, that is allowing us to subsidize the cost of that stove all the way down to around 500 shillings for homes in rural Kenya. And that's a level that homes can actually reach to and afford and be able to adopt the stove. As a result, we've gone from distributing a few hundred of these stoves every month in Kenya to now distributing 30,000 of these stoves every month in Kenya. So it's a massive, several orders of magnitude jump in scale that we've seen on just this one product for just this one project in Kenya that should be able to kind of continue indefinitely now and allow us to reach vast swaths of rural Kenya with this stove. And every home that's using this now is seeing that their wood use is dropping by 60, 70%. The amount of time they need to spend to gather that wood is dropping. And off the back of that, we are generating carbon credits, aligning with the kind of reduction in emissions that's coming from the use of these stoves. And we're using those carbon credits to repay that upfront investment that we've brought in. So that's a very kind of tangible example of how carbon markets can really act as a big driver of scale for adoption of these kinds of clean, environmentally friendly technologies.
Thanks, Chris. And I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into how we are unlocking scale through carbon finance, looking at it across the board from a policy, from a ban perspective, and also from the USAID perspective. And you have mentioned a little bit on how carbon finance has been critical in scaling up the cooking solutions, and mentioned a couple of projects where carbon finance has enabled it to do so. Could you also delve another step, delve a little bit deeper to tell us specifically about projects or specific partnerships where carbon finance has played a transformative role in expanding your reach and making clean cooking accessible to more households?
Sure. Well, I've talked about this example in Kenya, and that's really an example of how Burn acts as a full value chain operator in the space. So in several of our projects, we do everything. We do the manufacturing. We also do the distribution. So we have agent teams. We have our factory in Ruiru, Kenya, manufacturing the stoves. And then we have our agent teams on the ground going door to door, distributing the stoves. And then we have our own monitoring and verification teams that go and monitor the stoves and ensure they're being used and provide the after sales support. So that's one example. And we do that type of operation across 10 countries in Africa. We also have partnerships that allow us to extend our reach to many other countries in Africa. And I think one great example of that is our partnership with Del Agua in Rwanda. So we work with a company called Del Agua in Rwanda, who's partnered with the Rwandan government to distribute, again, the same wood stoves to nearly every rural home in Rwanda at this point. So they've partnered with the government who's supporting this initiative. And to date, they distributed over 1 million stoves, and that covers basically all of rural Rwanda. And so it's an example of how if the government is kind of laying out clear policies on this, supporting carbon markets, supporting clean cooking, it can unlock really massive scale. And I was fortunate enough to go visit this operation myself a few months ago and visit some of the homes in Rwanda who have received some of these stoves, and it's really a transformational impact on their lives that, again, wouldn't have happened otherwise without carbon markets. These homes had no other option but to cook on 3-stone fires, essentially. They're out of reach of both financially and from just a logistical supply chain perspective. They're out of reach from other types of clean cooking technologies like LPG or electricity, and so they're stuck with using wood, and now they're able to use a Burn Kuniokoa. And we were just hearing, on the ground, great feedback from these homes who now are spending very, very little time having to gather wood instead of having to travel far to collect large logs to use on a 3-stone fire. They can essentially just gather twigs from their nearby environment to cook, and they're spending much less time cooking, and they're doing that without kind of seeing the health impacts, the coughing, asthma issues, watering eyes that they were having with their 3-stone fire. And so it's impactful enough to the extent that some of these homes that we visited had deconstructed their 3-stone fire entirely, and they said, I'm never going back to using that again. And so that's I think a testament to the kind of transformative impact that carbon markets and these types of partnerships can create.
Thank you. Beatrice, how do you envision the future of carbon finance in Kenya's sustainable development efforts? Specifically, what strategies and collaborations do you foresee that could further unlock the potential for carbon finance in driving environmental and social impact, as Chris has mentioned some of the benefits that communities are already reaping from the projects that are already ongoing?
Thank you, Eva. And Chris has done an amazing job of describing just what carbon markets can do and carbon finance can do in the health sector and also for economic growth. So if you look at carbon market in Africa as a whole, it is right now the fastest growing sector than any other. Carbon markets in Africa have grown at 35% per annum since 2016. And again, I just want to emphasize that this is higher growth than any other sector in the entire economy. Kenya is well positioned to be a carbon leader. And Bianca mentioned this earlier in her remarks that President William Ruto has described carbon credits as Kenya's next significant export and has called for simplified and more transparent carbon market systems that directly benefit communities during his remarks at COP27. Kenya has the potential to sequester, reduce, or avoid 30 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, mobilizing up to 500 million annually by 2030. And this is just if you use an average price of $20 per ton. And we all know that the prices keep changing, and they're projected to increase up to $50 per ton. So from 2016 to 2021, Kenya issued 26 metric tons of carbon offsets, more than any other African country, and approximately 23% of total African credits. Expanding the country's carbon market ecosystem could also result in 600,000 new jobs in areas such as project development, carbon generation monitoring, and overall economic growth. So several strategies are needed to unlock the potential of carbon financing, driving economic, environmental, and social impact in Kenya. And let's face it, we do have challenges, but I'll briefly talk about some of those challenges, but also some opportunities that Kenya could deploy to really activate this market. If we look at financing, a number of investors, including development banks, commercial institutions, and insurance companies, have difficulty in including carbon cash flows when evaluating the investment risk profile of a carbon project. So in this case, regulatory and global price certainty, risk reduction mechanisms, and additional case studies can help with this challenge. Again, if you look at regulation, there's no current regulatory framework and taxonomy for the carbon market space. Key questions include which organization can generate a carbon credit, the type of credits, standards, level of community benefits, prices, and platforms to sell the credits. As Bianca mentioned earlier, and as I also mentioned earlier, the government of Kenya is working on regulations related to scaling the voluntary carbon market and pathways to interact with the global markets. When you look at equity and integrity, many carbon projects have failed to achieve their goal, with money often siphoned by middlemen that should instead go to communities themselves. Establishing correct regulatory oversight, market infrastructure, and capacity building is key to accomplishing equity and integrity in credits. Again, just lastly, in terms of just putting out challenges and possible solutions, when you look at digital infrastructure, a number of groups, including CAVEX and UNDP's Climate Promise, are creating digital infrastructure that allows for traceability of the carbon supply chain, tracking the types of credit, ownership, sale, and retirement. Such systems are needed to increase transparency in the carbon space and facilitate sales. So in conclusion, and as Bianca mentioned earlier, we cannot overemphasize the importance of getting the Amendment Act and regulations in place, but this is just the beginning. This will be an important victory, but it will provide the signal that we can now really activate the market in Kenya. The next step will involve two big sets of activities. With the government, they will need to operationalize and roll out the regulations. Industry stakeholders can and should support in helping them do this, building and operationalizing the registry, negotiating the first full Article 6 bilateral agreement, setting up the detailed processes for managing corresponding adjustments, and many other things. In addition, there's significant need for continued support and activities to promote the development of the sector outside of the realms of the government. This is where private capital can play a big role, and this is also where development partners can play a big role. This includes targeted activities to build the capabilities of developers, ensuring global buyers are interested in African credits, support to ensure local communities are building their knowledge and capabilities to ensure they maximize benefit from this space, engaging with the intermediaries to ensure they are committed to Africa as well. I'll stop there for now, Eva. Thank you. Over back to you.
Thank you. That was quite elaborate and has touched on even a couple of questions that I'm already seeing at within the panel in terms of role of government in operationalizing and bringing in the regulations needed to support the carbon markets, looking at how to support the industry from to attract global buyers, specifically for African carbon credits as high quality and high integrity. And the most important thing is ensuring that communities, local communities, fully understand how they are able to benefit and are able to reap those benefits for themselves and for the future generations. And with that in mind, and going back to Bianca, and I'd like to go a little bit deeper in terms of we have what is coming through from our regulatory framework, and that's what you've been working with through the Clean Cooking Framework. However, another critical role that you play is within the voluntary carbon markets, which complements the carbon finance mechanisms. So I'd like you to delve a little bit into this, Bianca, on how can voluntary carbon markets complement the existing carbon finance mechanisms in regard to integrity and the regulatory frameworks that we have, such as the Climate Amendment Bill, in helping us drive sustainable development in Kenya, looking at the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead for Kenya.
Thank you, Evelyn. So the voluntary carbon markets, literally from the name, you can see voluntary, were not really regulated. So even when Kenya was taking part in it and doing very well, we've had the statistics of issuing, 23% of Africa's credits in between 2016 and 2021. That was quite an achievement. But what you'll realize is that a lot of countries did not necessarily know what voluntary carbon market activity was going on, because there was no regulation to report on it. But of course, with some standards, they do let you say that you have to talk to the government environmental authority or DNA at the moment. But really, there wasn't, they didn't have as much knowledge as they should have on this. And since it's a sector that was doing so well, it can contribute to the country's national priorities, to NDCs. It's something that governments should definitely be aware of and know how it's contributing to the decarbonization plans, to the economy. And it's something that is definitely scalable. So we've seen that. Now, globally, the voluntary carbon markets are much smaller than the compliance markets, but there's definitely a lot of room to scale up and for us to tap into that. And for us, it's really important when we're looking at our regulatory framework, it's not we're just going to do VCM or we're just going to do Article 6. It's a situation where we have a system that encompasses everything. So the VCM activities can actually complement what the country is doing in terms of Article 6 and carbon market activities generally. So what you're seeing now is a situation where there's more transparency coming out from voluntary carbon market activities. Governments can decide whether to authorize or not authorize certain activities. So we have a situation whether your Article 6, whether your VCM, the government is clear on what's happening. There's a lot of transparency coming in. There's no double counting, and we can see where the contribution is going. And because of this, we're having a situation where VCM activities in Kenya are going to produce units. And because we want to be a lead exporter, these units have to be of high quality. So you're in a situation where you're producing high quality units and they need to get a fair price. So you also need to make sure on the demand side that the buyers of these units have high integrity and that they are making credible claims. So you're having a situation where you have end-to-end integrity. We as Kenya are producing high quality units and the buyers of these credits are also making credible claims. In that way, we have a system that is transparent and we are seeing how we are contributing to mitigation on a global level. So it's definitely contributing to lower the greenhouse gas emissions. The technology is flowing, and then the voluntary carbon market is also growing. It's still might not be as large as some of the activities that will happen in Article 6, but nonetheless, we have to take advantage of this situation because we already have a track record in this space. We've seen that it's working with avoiding deforestation, with clean cooking, and this is also directly contributing to our targets. We have a clean cooking target of 100% by 2028. Companies like Burn are so instrumental in this. In any other companies that are fighting, that are also doing clean cooking, also contributing to avoiding deforestation, they're contributing to health benefits. Like when you look at it entirely, VCM activities, when scaled, will definitely contribute to what we want in terms of development, in terms of a green trajectory, and in terms of benefiting our community and having indigenous peoples not only just benefiting, but also in some types of projects being instrumental in the design of these projects so that they have a say and contribute from the very beginning. So once you sort out the integrity issue, once it's transparency, that also creates confidence. It will also affect the price, and it will eventually also affect the growth. So once you get integrity right, you get the pricing right, there's definitely a growth in the system. And as companies and countries move towards the net zero targets and continue decarbonizing, there will be a role for carbon markets in accelerating that.
Thank you, Bianca. We have quite a number of questions that are coming through from our participants. Thank you. And I'll just take time to allocate you as we go and see how we can best respond. For some, I will combine them, especially the policy ones, and see how we can get the responses very fast. So first question to you, Chris, is that you've spoken quite a bit about clean cook stoves, specifically in rural setups that have benefited and have had great impact on these communities. What about the urban poor who are just as much disadvantaged as the rural poor? How are your cook stoves supporting these communities, and what impact are you seeing from the urban poor?
Right. No, it's definitely another kind of underserved space today when it comes to cooking. You know, we have a few initiatives on the kind of urban and peri-urban front as well. I mentioned a study at the outset of the panel that was actually done on our charcoal stove, the Jiko-Koa. So that stove cuts charcoal consumption by about 2/3, and that's primarily a product for urban and peri-urban places where people are, many of the urban poor are stuck using charcoal. And this is a tool to immediately cut their consumption by a great deal. And again, in some ways even more impactful than in a rural setting, because you have to buy charcoal, and families can spend up to 20% of their income on buying charcoal just to cook. So we can also cut that expense by like 1/2 to 2/3 as well, which has a massive economic impact. But kind of looking into the future as well, I think one of the opportunities we're really excited about is if we continue to see carbon markets grow, if we see clear policy that is supportive of this investment flowing in and us being able to work with international investors to run these kinds of projects, we can use this to even leapfrog beyond wood and beyond charcoal entirely. So for instance, in urban and peri-urban Kenya today, we're working on a project where we are implementing electric cooking across homes in this sector. And as we see the grid grow, and especially the grid in Kenya, which is already vastly renewable powered, we see a really large opportunity to use carbon markets to allow people to leapfrog off of dirty fuels for cooking entirely and move to electric, which for us we see as with a Burn electric stove, people can cook more cheaply on a running basis than using charcoal. And they can do that with zero indoor air pollution and using power that is majority renewable. So I think there's some really big and exciting opportunities in that space that we see coming as well.
Okay. Thank you. Bianca, let me get back to you. You've spoken quite a bit around the policy that you are implementing and the work that is being done. You've also been very clear that it is a long journey, but it is a marathon, not a sprint. And there are quite a lot of things that are being done to ensure that we get a good policy that takes into account the various audiences and the various actors in the space. So we have a question on how does the policy seek to harness transparency, accountability, and benefit of carbon credit investments, specifically to local communities and how will it encourage them promote climate mitigation and adaptation?
Well, the amendment bill will definitely touch on some of these issues. And just to be clear that once the amendment bill passes, that now gives us room to have regulations. And the regulations are the ones that go into a lot more detail, put the meat on the bone in terms of these issues. But ideally, with transparency, we need to have proper monitoring systems. We need an MRV system on a national scale to do that. And the amendment bill touches on that. We will need a national registry so that we can know and track what's happening with our projects, what's happening with the flow of internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, known as ITMOs. So the underlying policy is making sure that we will have this infrastructure and these systems in place that make it transparent, especially on the voluntary side, because there was not much known there, but now we can see what's happening. And then also on the Article 6 side of things, because for Kenya, as you know, members, as we have signed on to the Paris Agreement, we will have to report on anything that we do around Article 6 and how it's affecting our NDC. So the policy is going to make sure that we have those proper and clear MRV systems, but also have benefit sharing mechanisms. Of course, we address the issue of benefits sharing and agreements in the amendment bill. And there are different proposals that have been put forward in terms of how the community can benefit. But what we are seeing is that from the beginning, the community are going to have a say. They're going to have a role, a very clear role. And then when we get into the regulations, that will even have a lot more detail into how this is being done. Of course, in the past, sometimes there was, talk of the sustainable development benefits not getting there. But this is something that is being captured in the amendment bill, and we'll definitely go into more detail in the regulations. So just to be aware that the government wants to do this in the best interests of the people. So community benefits sharing is something that has been captured.
Thank you. Beatrice, you have spoken in detail about the potential of carbon finance and how much we're able to sell, looking at, you mentioned $500 million annually up to 2030. One question that I'm seeing very consistently is, what does it take to unlock investment, and taking into account that USAID as an organization has been able to invest and is helping communities reap some of this from a carbon finance? What does it take to, what do you look for as an investor from a carbon finance perspective? And therefore, how do you help communities unlock this benefit, and looking at what you've been able to do over the last couple of years?
Thank you, Eva. And I'll give an example of our own experience designing and rolling out the world's largest grasslands carbon project. One thing that is unknown to many is that for you to really trade in the VCM, the first and foremost, you have to have the right methodology. And I think this is the biggest limitation we have, because we have methodologies that are not either approved, or potential sectors that don't have the right methodologies. And without that, then you cannot get your project verified or even certified for trading. So for instance, in our case, one of the projects that we help support, the Grassland project, it took them close to 10 years to actually document a methodology for grasslands, carbon quantification. And it took a while. So that also goes to show you that there's a lot of learning in this space. But the fact that that particular methodology was created, other community members, other potential investors don't have to recreate. The methodologies are available publicly, that the potential investments in grasslands can be scaled across the country. For the project that I spoke about, that's only covering 14 conservancies. We have close to 237 conservancies in this country. And there's lots of potential also in agriculture, and still in renewable energy and many other areas. So again, I'll just emphasize that finding the right methodologies, bringing more tools around methodologies, but also really making sure that communities are organized and potential carbon investors, Kenyan investors, are organized to take to take up these opportunities. Again, also finance is a critical issue. Developing carbon projects takes time. It takes some finances. But we've seen from USAID's experience, we've also seen that there are many investors that would want to upfront those costs. So this is not just a sector that is driven by donors, but there are many private sector. In fact, some of them would say, look, I'm not going to serve as a consultant. I want to invest in a project, package a project that I know I'm going to take to market. So there's a huge scope for private sector investors to come in and invest in the development stage. So I think the opportunities are limitless. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you. I'll pose this question to Chris. Having worked with several investors, and also because the question on investment, unlocking carbon finance specifically for companies is for unlocking carbon finance and also reducing carbon emissions is coming up quite a bit. Looking at BURN and what you've been able to scale, how are you working and how have you been able to lock some of these investments to enable you scale and be able to also impact communities?
Thanks, Evelyn. Yeah, well, BURN has been at this for a long time. I mean, Beatrice mentioned the project that took 10 years to kind of work out what methodology to use. We've also been working on structuring these types of projects and this whole operation for quite a while, since really, I guess, around 2017. So it's now been 7 years, and we're finally seeing the fruits of that in terms of seeing like really large scale coming out, but we had to put things in place really piece by piece by piece. And it hasn't been an easy journey really so far. I mean, making sure we're using the right methodologies, making sure we have the right talent and the right functions. Again, like as BURN, we had to, well, I think one of the key kind of drivers for success for us was setting up the entire value chain of operations ourselves to be able to execute on a project like this, because we weren't really able to outsource or find many of those functions or services here on the ground today. So, from building up the design capabilities to the manufacturing capabilities to the distribution capabilities, we had to put in place kind of large investments and a lot of effort up front, but that has borne fruit today, where investors, of course, are very attracted to that setup where we now can kind of execute from end to end on a project from the very beginning to the end. But today, now that we have kind of proven it out and we have a system that's working, we're generating carbon, we're selling that carbon, we're using the funds from carbon, pre-financed to subsidize stoves up front. Now that that's a system that's actually working, we're seeing much more investor interest, but it's not to kind of push aside some of the challenges involved there. And I think what we hope is that the new regulations that will come out in carbon for carbon markets, the support from initiatives like the African Carbon Market Initiative and support from USAID and other similar donors will help kind of create more of that carbon ecosystem locally and encourage more private investment into that ecosystem. That's what we really need to see this grow further.
Okay. Bianca, if I may come back to you, there's quite a lot of questions around the bill and two aspects: education for communities so that they're able to know how to leverage carbon financing to their benefits. And second is for organizations that are interested in monetizing carbon trading. For instance, in agriculture, someone has mentioned a tea estate, someone has mentioned forestry, one has mentioned also, how are they able to then, what education do you have planned, especially for businesses, for farmers, for these people in these spaces to be able to start harnessing, and what plans does the government have, and when do you expect to roll that out? Because as we can see, there's quite a bit of interest and a lot of eagerness on how do I monetize it? How do I start benefiting? How can I ensure that my community starts seeing this coming to life in their space?
That's a difficult question. When we'll roll out. So I would say the line ministry, the Ministry of Environment, usually it's in their mandate to mainstream climate change issues across the board, across different communities, across different stakeholders. And I believe it will be part and parcel in doing the same thing about carbon markets. For those who may or may not know, we have national climate change action plans. And those are very clear in terms of the climate change activities we do as a country every 5 years. And because we've said that, we'll be doing Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, we're putting in these regulations, we will definitely need to find ways of encouraging more projects to come on board and getting more awareness out there. So it's something that the government, or rather, when we're implementing our action plan, that we will be doing to see how we can further foster Article 6 and voluntary carbon markets. In the meantime, there are other initiatives out there that do have a lot of capacity building opportunities, that give a lot of awareness, because I know sometimes it's like, where do I start? And then sometimes it's also a long process for people. They need to understand there's a whole life cycle. You need to register, you need to do your design document, get it validated, register, monitor. It's a process, and you have to have the financing for that. So I think initiatives like ACME are working with project developers to help them access some kind of financing, to help them grow in that particular area. But also like the alliances, the Eastern Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets has been really good in talking with the private sector on aspects that they find challenging and helping them to plug in. We are now looking at a situation where we need more local verifiers. We need more local auditors to help in this process. And as the interest grows, you'll see a lot of consultants now also getting the expertise to become verified auditors, and the system will organically grow, and you'll see more courses coming out. So the Alliance has courses. You can always look at the World Bank for resources. USAID has been working with the conservancies through the association to also help them with their awareness. The Alliance does work on specific requests from countries. So if the government requests, we want to maybe train, we did a training, there was a training done for the youth on understanding carbon markets. If CSOs want to understand this, these are things that can always be done. You can always go to the ministry directly to ask them to organize that, or you can go to the alliances, the Eastern one, and there's one in West Africa as well. And then of course, ACME also is really trying to grow the market in terms of having the supply from the developers, having verification, local verification, and of course, having the commitments as well. So there is information out there. There's also the Open Knowledge Campus that the World Bank has had for several years. There's always ways to start teaching yourself, but of course, we don't want a situation where everyone is calling themselves an expert. So what we will see also is more credible courses coming on board, where we can train people to have these high skills in supporting more developers to come on board. And then lastly, for local financial institutions, they will also need to come on board, because you don't want a situation where they come in late when, like what happened with the CDM. They didn't understand, so they weren't, giving loans that were concessional. But if they come in early and realize that they can actually provide financing in early stages of the projects and find a way of, using the carbon credits to, help these companies to subsidize their technologies, then they will have a key role in also accelerating this. So there is more work that needs to be done in bringing the financial sector, the local one, on board. But I do know for those who are aspiring to be project developers, you can always reach out to different networks. There's the Nairobi Climate Network as well, where you can learn from other advanced developers, because that's something we see. We see very experienced developers and then very green. So how do you meet it in between? Nairobi Climate Network, the Eastern Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance, and then of course the Line Ministry, of course, will be addressing all of this in the action plan, which they are currently developing, but will be issued, I believe, before the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. I see we have around 10 minutes left, and I'd like to take this opportunity to just look at some parting shots for everyone. And this is where a last question, looking at what do you see for the future of carbon markets in Kenya? And I'll start with you, Beatrice.
Eva, could you just repeat that question, please?
What do you see for the future of carbon markets in Kenya? Looking at what you've been able to achieve, where we are now, and where you potentially see us growing to.
Again, I've spoken quite a lot about the possibilities for Kenya. And I do think that, carbon markets are really a solution that we are seeing, a solution that is really gaining growth. And I do think that there is now, for us to make sure that those who are most affected by the climate crisis, we have to make sure that they access the financing necessary to adapt to the increasing changes in climate change. So, the growth I see for Kenya, to be honest, the biggest sector for Kenya in carbon markets is really is in the renewable energy. But we also know that Kenya has a lot of potential to explore other investment areas. A lot of what we've seen as the potential beyond obviously the renewable energy, we're seeing much more in potential in the forest sector, but we know Kenya has very little forest cover. This huge 80% of Kenya is under rangelands. It's under arid areas. There's potential for us to explore how to expand that space and bring in more communities living in these areas that are most affected to really gain in carbon markets. So I've talked again earlier on quite a lot about all the different things, in terms of financing, what we need to do about that to make sure that this works, the equity and integrity issues. Bianca's talked a lot about regulation. So the entire ecosystem has to work. We have to have the right supply, and that takes a lot of building capacity for project developers. We need verifiers on the continent. We also need to make sure that we are attracting the best buyers who will offer the country the best prices. And I think this has been repeated quite a lot by most of our government leaders, that Kenya's market is going to have to be one of the most high value markets, one that sets the highest integrity and transparency. And if we define that as a brand for Kenya's carbon market, then we are likely and we will attract the right investors and the right prices. So we have to keep our, the Kenyan's carbon market space as a premium credits for us to maintain that, mark as a big exporter in the industry. But also just, and even I'm taking this, is this part of the parting shot as well? Could I say
Yes.
my last?
Yes.
It is?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think at this point, one thing I want to emphasize is that at this point of the climate discussion, we all agree that we will not be able to put the world back on a safer temperature trajectory unless we scale climate solutions. And scaling carbon finance as a climate solution will require tapping into new sources of climate financing, as I've repeatedly mentioned. But it also requires engaging with responsible private sector actors, such as many of you present on this call. These are actors that are transparent and they have safeguards so that frontline communities get a fair share of the benefits. I strongly believe that when everyone benefits, these solutions bring the success we all aspire for our planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. That was very detailed and has really broken down the whole value chain around carbon and the work that lies ahead. I believe even for Bianca, looking at what you've mentioned, there's quite a bit of work that they know that has to be done from a government perspective. And probably this would be your opportunity, Bianca, to also give your parting shot, looking at the future, the work ahead, and how you will bring this to life, especially for Kenya, to make it a successful carbon market.
The work that we're doing really is pioneering, but not just for developing countries, for countries everywhere. When we're looking at mechanisms around Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, it's new for everybody. So there's capacity building that needs to be done on different levels across the board. So as we do our legal frameworks, they might not be perfect. There's definitely room for improvement as we keep going, but we're in a place where the market has evolved so much. We have a good idea of what quality is, just as Beatrice has been saying. We know what we want in terms of transparency, and we can definitely start engaging in these activities while we set up these systems. We can't wait for a situation where everything is perfect and then now we'll start doing our regulations. It's a lot of learning by doing, but learning because this has also been happening for a long time. So they're actual credible lessons that we have picked up on. So we are definitely working on the legal framework, on the institutional capacities and the infrastructure. Setting up a national registry is not going to be easy. So there's a lot of technical details around that. But they're very simple ways of still tracking activity that's ongoing and still being transparent about it, even though you don't have the perfect registry. So we as Kenya are very committed to making sure that we are contributing to our NDC, but at the same time, we are really attracting this new financing that will come from carbon finance and will really help us in our low carbon resilient development. So this is going to be a situation where it's not, you're developing in a bad trajectory or there's a trade-off between the two. No, we're having development and carbon finance is actually going to help us do it in a very green way. We are going to get the local experts. Our skill force will definitely grow, and the jobs will definitely grow as well. I know the projections can be very high sometimes, but we have a lot of work to actually realize those projections in terms of the amount we're getting every year. If we don't have the proper tools in place or the foundation in place, and to be transparent about it the entire time, make sure there is environmental integrity in the system, we will definitely be able to realize this, and it will be a better experience than what we had before. We definitely do not want a repeat of that. And we as Kenya are saying that we are coming to the forefront as actual players. We are ready for investment. It's not about aid. It's not about victimhood. We have the capacity to actually make this work, whether it's from a project developer side, from an MRV perspective, from getting good buyers. It's a situation where we can contribute, and just as Beatrice has said, premium. We look for buyers also that have high integrity as well, because this is a global problem, which carbon markets is going to contribute a solution to. So thank you for that. And definitely be on the lookout for the regulations, just to make sure that we are currently, the cabinet has approved the amendment bill. So it's going to go to parliament, after which now we'll do the regulations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bianca. And you've said something very, very important. We are learning by doing. It's new to not Kenya, but the whole world. So there's room for growth, room for failure, and room to re-strategize and pivot as we move ahead. And speaking about growth and pivoting and the future, I'd like to invite Chris to talk about what does this future therefore look for BAN?
Yeah, well, I think it's the future looks very bright in Kenya for this space as a whole. And I think, as Bianca mentioned, and as the president has said, I think what we'll see in the future, in the coming years, is that Kenya is not seen as a victim of climate change, but as one of the key contributors to the solutions for climate change. I think if we get this right on the regulatory front and the market activation front, then that's where we will end up, and we'll see massive kind of economic growth driven by carbon markets in Kenya. And clean cooking is a great example of this. We have the government has a goal of universal access to clean cooking by 2028. Carbon markets are really, when you look globally at what funding streams are driving adoption to clean cooking, carbon markets are the single largest source of that, and they can grow much bigger if we get this right in Kenya and encourage that investment to flow in and encourage these projects to happen. And so we can meet that goal, and Bern can play a really critical role in helping meet that goal of universal access to clean cooking through the use of carbon markets. We see, it's not just Bern. We have many companies playing in this space in Kenya who can all contribute to this. And if we see the local ecosystems being built and the right frameworks being put in place, we can get there. So we're very excited about what the future looks like for carbon markets in Kenya.
Yes. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we bring this panel discussion to a close. And as Chris has said, Kenya is not a victim, but a part of the solution. And it's quite exciting to see what's happening from a carbon markets perspective. A big thank you to our speakers, Chris, Bianca, Beatrice, for making the time to share the expertise and insights with us today. And thank you to AmCham. And a special thanks to the Office of the Special Climate Envoy for Kenya and USAID for this collaboration as we're putting this together. I trust that this session has been very useful and given a lot of valuable insights. And I'd like to now hand over to Eva to bring us to a close.
Thank you, Evelyn, for that fantastic moderation, and thank you to the speakers as well for sharing your insights. The session has been extremely edifying, and for us at AmCham, we really look forward to having an opportunity to continue to engage on this topic. We have been engaging thoroughly with the Kenyan government in developing the climate change policy framework. We did put in our submissions on the amendment bill, and Bianca, we are looking forward to those regulations in order for us to provide our input and continue to engage. Thank you very much for members. We have completely ran over time, but thank you for staying with us, and thank you for your feedback and your questions. We will share the recording in a couple of days, and we look forward to continuing our engagement on this. Thank you.